and welcome to the NBA Market Advantage podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about tonight's Friday slate. Huge slate of action. I'm going to be giving you the differences in pricing between FanDuel and DraftKings for this 12-game slate for tonight. And then the next podcast, the Minutes to Win It, get into some more of my favorite plays and things of that nature. Starting off with a guy who had a monster game last night, Bismack Biyombo, $4,900 on DraftKings, $4,000 on FanDuel. And this is a guy who had a monster game last night in 40 minutes, 8 points, 18 boards, 7 blocks, 45.6 FanDuel points. On a slate that only had 3 games last night, there were not very many viable center options. If you didn't have Biyombo, you likely didn't make much money. He was the guy that we had highlighted as a great value last night, and he's still a good value tonight, more so on FanDuel than on DraftKings. Obviously not quite the play that he was last night on a full slate of games. Facing off against a Miami team that, while Hassan Whiteside has given up some big games, they're still a very good defensive unit. So obviously Biyombo, most of his value in blocks and rebounds. So he's the guy you certainly consider, but not a guy that you're going out of your way to roster. Another guy who's got a big difference here, Brook Lopez, $6,900 on DraftKings, $79 on FanDuel. This is a guy who has had a really cheap price on DraftKings really all season. And after a really hot start to the season, last couple of games been some disappointments here. We saw 19 minutes against Philly, 13.9 fantasy points, and 32 minutes against the Clippers, 27, 32 minutes against Orlando, 17. Turn that back around with a 28-minute, 25-6 game against Miami for 32 fantasy points. But this is a guy that does have upside. I'm not likely paying his price on FanDuel at all tonight. It's a good matchup against an Indiana team that does not rebound or defend particularly well down low. I mean, good defensive team overall, though. But certainly if you're going to be trying to attack them, down low is where you want to do it. I think on DraftKings, he's the guy that is in play for me. But on a 12-game slate, I'm not likely to pay $8K for him almost on FanDuel. Elsewhere, you've got Chris Paul sitting at a cheaper price here on DraftKings at $7,885 on FanDuel. And this is a guy who missed a couple games around a week ago, came back with a couple decent games. His last 3, though, shown some nice consistency. 15, 2, and 14, 13, 5, and 12, 21, 6, and 8 in his last 3 games. Now facing off tonight against the Spurs team. This is going to be the game that, well, I, of course, as a Spurs fan, want to watch, but really the game that everyone wants to watch. Outside of this one, I mean, you're talking about the narrative that Klay Thompson and company invented in Golden State, that they don't think that Milwaukee won with much class, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're going to win that game by as much as they want to win it by anyway. If we're looking at competitive games, kind of see a measuring stick. These are 2 teams that are expected to be contenders in the West, so that's the game that I'm looking at. And Chris Paul is certainly going to have his share of opportunities in this one. Elsewhere, you got DeMar DeRozan coming off a monster game last night. He's a guy who has a slight price difference here, 77 on FanDuel, 72 on DraftKings. Looking at his last couple games, I mean, actual points, the last 10, 29, 17, 34, 16, 16, 28, 27, 25, 20, 31. Obviously played 44 minutes last night, so I'm not going out of my way to roster him against Miami tonight at his FanDuel price on DraftKings. Worth the look. I mean, he's shooting the ball very well right now, so this is a guy that I'll definitely give a look to in tournaments, but $500 price difference just doesn't do quite enough for me here. Looking elsewhere, obviously there's going to be some injury concerns here. One guy who's been definitely a big-time concern has been Emmanuel Mudiay, who's missed a couple games. His status is questionable for right now against the Jazz tonight. Obviously, if he doesn't play, that's going to bump up Jameer Nelson once again, who still has a nice little discount between the 2 sites. $4,900 on DraftKings, $43 on FanDuel. He's a guy that you just slot in there in your cash games. He makes a lot of sense. He's cheap. You expect him to get you 20 to 25, upwards of 30 fantasy points if the situation dictates. Obviously, the Jazz, a good defensive team, not quite the team they are without Rudy Gobert, but a team you can definitely attack in the backcourt. Not a lot of good defenders there for them. So obviously contingent on Mudiay's status. Nothing official as of this morning, but I'm definitely monitor that as we move on. Another guy who has a nice discount is John Lure. He's a guy who just continues to be underpriced on FanDuel. Finally bumped up to $4,600. Only played 14 minutes against Golden State, but we saw starters really for both teams not play a lot here. This game, 46-point third quarter. It was absolutely unbelievable. Mirza Teletovic was hot. And once again, Markieff Morris didn't play. I'm not terribly concerned about that moving forward, but his price difference is one of the biggest on the night. Actually, I think it is the biggest on the night. 5,900 on DK, 46 on FanDuel. So facing off against New Orleans, obviously you're going to need to have some big bodies in there. And while Mirza Teletovic is a guy you want to consider in your GPPs, still like John Lure on FanDuel tonight, despite only playing 14 minutes last game. Next up, one guy who's really, really hot offensively, a guy that you don't normally play for his offensive stats, is Kentavious CaldwellPope. $5,900 on FanDuel, 52 on DraftKings. Look at his recent logs. I mean, 23, 47, 26, and 40 fantasy points in these last couple games. Unfortunately for him, he's going to see some Jimmy Butler tonight, and that generally doesn't bode well for anyone. Obviously, both guys good defenders. Jimmy Butler, obviously one of, if not the best defender at the shooting guard position, and he has himself a decent price discount as well. $8,300 on FanDuel, $75 on DraftKings, and as we know, Jimmy Butler about as consistent as they come. He plays monster minutes. So, I mean, if you're going to take a choice between the two guys, obviously you could take the discount with Kentavious CaldwellPope, but certainly a guy that does have a much lower floor. But I think both guys in play. Jimmy Butler, a guy that probably on a slate like this, in that matchup, going to be a little bit less owned than he probably should. So both guys in play, both guys with a nice price discount. Kristaps Porzingis, another guy who continues to be cheap on FanDuel, bumped up $100 from last time, 64 compared to 74 on DraftKings. Came back after a couple down games with that big game against Sacramento mixed in between, saying he was tired. But 29 minutes against Minnesota, 11.6 boards, 3 assists, 7 blocks. 33.7 FanDuel points there. And at his price discount on FanDuel, certainly a guy that you're still considering here. You're looking at his matchup against Philly. Not going to get much better than that one. So obviously your only concern really is if Philly keeps the game close. But Knicks haven't really been blowing people out. So that's certainly a guy you're going to throw into some of your lineups there as well. I'm looking at other discounts. Matt Barnes. I'm not getting off the Matt Barnes train. He burned me last time. $4,500 on FanDuel, 53 on DraftKings. Played just 22 minutes. 11.2 fantasy points, and had 4 fouls. And we saw Memphis go big. So obviously, Chicago go big against Memphis in that game. So obviously, if that's the case, we saw Zach Randolph take more minutes. And in his matchup tonight against Dallas, not a team that has 3 viable bigs like Gasol and Noah. So certainly a guy that you're going to be looking at as a potential to get back up to his big minutes and get back to that nice production. And, his matchup against Dallas has been a team that's been kind of a roller coaster. Overall, a decent defensive team, but I'm rolling with Matt Barnes as a cheap value play in all formats once again here. A couple other discounts for you here. Omri Casspi is another guy, just, I won't say quietly, but he's been one of the more consistent options in the cheap range this year. And his minutes right now, just phenomenal. 41, 40, 38 in his last 3 games. 37, 25, 34 fantasy points on FanDuel. 5,000 there, 5,900 on DraftKings. And tonight, facing off against the Minnesota team that, as we've seen before, has given up some big games to really players at any position. So certainly he is a guy that's in play. Obviously, if you're going to be paying up for someone in this game, it's probably going to be DeMarcus Cousins. But if you're looking for some cheap value, there's quite a bit of it at small forward, and he's certainly on my list. Elsewhere, Pau Gasol, $7,600 on DraftKings, $8,400 on FanDuel. Obviously, a center on DraftKings, power forward on FanDuel. This is a guy that still has that pretty strict minutes cap, right around 33 minutes. He's a guy that's been very productive on a per minute basis, though. So I think against Detroit, a team that does have some size down low, but Drummond, not a great one-on-one defender. He's certainly a guy that I'm going to be throwing in, especially on DraftKings tonight. He just has a nice high floor, and so when he gets it going, he certainly has a ceiling as well. And you probably see this one coming, as I am the biggest Tim Duncan fan in the world. But I am a fan of Tim Duncan tonight. He rested last time against Washington. I don't think it was a coincidence that he sat out that game with this game on the docket. Obviously, you need some size to compete with the Clippers. Spurs obviously have Aldridge and Duncan and David West and Boban down low, and all these guys, lots of guys with size. But this is the type of game where Tim Duncan at $6,200 on FanDuel, 56 on DraftKings, certainly a guy I'm going to be putting into my lineups against DeAndre Jordan and company. He's a guy that gets up for these big games, should be well rested, and still producing at a high level on a permanent basis. Still not a guy you're going to see play much more than 30 minutes at absolute max, but Spurs want their best bigs in there against a team like the Clippers, and obviously Duncan's still one of their best bigs, so that's a guy I'll be throwing in there as well. And then another really big price difference, but not a guy that I'm going out of my way to play. Tony Roden, $5,500 on FanDuel, $4,000 on DraftKings. Still looking at right around a 20-minute limit last I saw, so not a guy that's on my radar, but he is a guy that does have a huge price difference there, and but not a guy that I'm going to be probably playing tonight. All right, that'll wrap things up for the Market Advantage. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.